In a world where only the gifted wield divine weapons, these sacred tools are the embodiment of a person's soul and possess unique, unparalleled abilities. The noble Castro family once defeated an evil god and has since been blessed with extraordinary gifts. Every member of this ducal house is born with a golden spoon in their mouth, boasting strong bodies, incredible talents, and divine weapons. Bell was born into this prestigious family, destined to become a hero and proudly wield his sacred weapon. Or so it was supposed to be. At the oracle ceremony, where each person's divine weapon is revealed, Bell received nothing. He became the first and only failure in the history of the Castro family. Shunned and ridiculed, Bell endured relentless bullying from his relatives. The most hostile among them was Zane, the second son of the family. Zane grabbed Bell by the hair, sneering that a nonentity like him, unable to summon a divine weapon, had no place in their family. Poor Bell, beaten and in pain, couldn't utter a word, only groaning as he suffered. Nearby stood the youngest daughter, Sarah, and the eldest daughter, Jessica. Jessica watched the scene with a smile, while Sarah was deeply worried. Unable to stand it any longer, Sarah tried to help her brother, but Jessica tripped her, causing her to fall. Jessica then placed her foot on Sarah's head, taunting her and asking what she thought she was doing. She commanded Sarah to simply observe and learn what happens to a nonentity like Bell, saying that they were just weaklings. Seeing this, Bell called out to his little sister in concern, but Zane yanked his hair even harder and stabbed him in the stomach. Bell collapsed to the ground, and Zane sat on top of him, pummeling his face and calling him a mudblood. With a cruel smile, Zane mocked Bell, asking if he really thought he could handle anything. He was just a mongrel, a worthless creature. Meanwhile, Jessica continued to beat Sarah, both siblings calling them mongrels and reveling in their cruelty. They were the chosen, and Bell and Sarah were the unwanted, the disgraced members of the illustrious Castro family. They were the children of a concubine, marked as rootless and relentlessly bullied by those around them. Bell and Sarah endured every torment until their oppressors grew tired and left them in peace. Bell, filled with guilt, bowed his head to Sarah. "It's all my fault," he said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "I need to apologize." Sarah, ever the beacon of hope, smiled warmly at him. "Don't worry," she replied. "I will always be there for you." Bell, his voice barely above a whisper, spoke her name and then, with a newfound determination, declared, "I will become stronger, even without divine weapons. I promise you, Sarah, I will protect you with my life." His eyes shone with resolve as he made this vow. Sarah, delighted by his words, rushed into his arms, thanking him profusely. Yet, despite his promise, fate had other plans. A few days later, Bell was cast out of the house amidst a torrential downpour, carrying only a small bag. As the gates of the estate closed behind him, he looked up, allowing the rain to cascade over his face, and cursed his helplessness. He understood that without him, Sarah would be left alone with their cruel tormentors. He needed strength, real strength, to free her. Ordinary weapons were useless against those who wielded divine power. He had no choice but to become stronger. Finally, Bell reached the city as the rain stopped. His first stop was a gun shop. He slammed a bag of coins onto the counter, the sound echoing through the shop. Pouring out the coins, he declared, "I want one of each type of weapon." The shopkeeper, counting the coins in astonishment, looked up at Bell and asked, "Are you planning to start a war?" 2 years passed. Bell, now a seasoned warrior with a horse and an arsenal of weapons, rode determinedly into the forest. His gaze was steely as he prepared for the battle ahead. A horde of armed goblins awaited him. He laid out his weapons on a cloth, selecting a sword and a mace. Smiling at the monsters, he announced, "Let's begin." Bell swung his weapons with precision, cutting through the air and quickly switching between them as he fought. Goblins fell one by one to his relentless assault. Suddenly, he heard footsteps behind him. He spun around, ready for another fight. On a rock stood a man in a white robe, his face hidden beneath a hood. Intrigued by Bell, the man called out, "Do you always carry so many weapons?" Bell replied, "I have to, because I have no divine weapon." The stranger, interested, said, "I am looking for someone with great heroic potential." A bright flash lit up in the man's palm, and he extended his hands, releasing a spark towards Bell. Blinded by the light, Bell shielded his eyes. When the light faded, a sheath was stuck in the ground before him. Surprised and nervous, Bell watched as the stranger explained, "I am giving this to you. It is the divine scabbard of Avalon. It can store and transfer divine weapons, growing stronger with each generation. It now contains the weapons of 5 great heroes. Master them, and you will wield the most powerful divine weapon in the world." 3 years later, Bell stood with the stranger on a high tower among the rocks. A red dragon flew in the sky, roaring as it descended. Bell extended a hand, summoning the scabbard of Avalon. It appeared, glowing with blue flashes. He commanded the weapon to appear, and Achilles' wind shield materialized in his other hand. As the dragon flew close, Bel lowered the shield, prepared for the impending battle, and faced the dragon with unwavering resolve. Following this, Bel immediately summoned the Holy Storm Hammer. Pulling his hand back, weapon in grip, he leaped high above the dragon. With a powerful swing, he brought the hammer down, striking the dragon with such force that its muzzle was pinned to the tower. The beast lay still, defeated. Bel stepped away from the dragon and approached his mentor, sheathing the scabbard as he walked. The man in the white robe, observing Bel's mastery, nodded in approval. "You have mastered Avalon," he said. "Now, go to your sister. Even an S-rank paladin will not stand in your way." Bel was initially surprised by his mentor's words but then felt a wave of joy. "I understand," he said, his voice brimming with determination. He set out on his journey, reflecting on the 5 years that had passed since his exile. Now, he possessed the power to protect his dear sister. "Sarah, just wait for me," he whispered, his resolve solidified. Night fell as Bel journeyed on. Suddenly, he saw bright flashes of flame and black smoke on the horizon, coming from the direction of the duchy. He stopped on a rock, peering ahead in horror. What happened, he wondered, his heart pounding. As he approached the scene, he saw flags fluttering amidst the chaos, bearing the coat of arms of the Duchy of Roth. Cautiously, Bel peeked around a corner, watching as armored men fought fiercely among themselves. Is this really a civil war, he thought, dread creeping into his mind. But where is Sarah? Rushing to the family estate, Bel ran through the grand corridor, shouting desperately, "Sarah! Your brother has returned. Where are you?" At the end of the corridor, he saw the doors ajar and hurried inside, hope and fear battling within him. His heart shattered as he beheld a horrific sight, his sister, lying next to a fallen column in a pool of her own blood. Bel froze, his face contorting with anguish. "Sarah," he cried, racing to her side. He lifted her gently, cradling her in his arms, his voice breaking as he called her name over and over, hoping for a miracle. At that moment, Bel realized she would never wake up. He stared at her lifeless form, his mind racing back to her promise, she would always be by his side. Grief overwhelmed him. He raised his head, a guttural scream tearing from his throat. Tears streamed down his face, splashing onto her body. "Why? Why did everything turn out this way?" he cried. "Why did I gain this power if I couldn't protect her?" As he vowed to return and protect her memory, a brilliant ray of light suddenly shot from behind, piercing his chest. Blood gushed from the wound, and he gasped in agony. Heavy footsteps echoed around him. The enemy was approaching slowly but deliberately. Bel recognized the gate, a S-rank divine weapon master. The stranger's cold voice cut through the air. "Is this Bel, the catastrophe? I heard he was banished long ago." Blood dribbled from Bel's mouth as he looked up, trying to focus on the man's face. The stranger sneered, "It doesn't matter. You will soon be reunited with your beloved sister." The realization hit Bel like a thunderbolt. It was this man who had killed Sarah. Rage surged within him. "You freak!" Bel shouted, turning to face his adversary, but before he could act, the enemy's weapon struck again, piercing his chest. A searing pain tore through Bel's body, and he thought he would die without exacting his revenge. He wouldn't accept this fate. As his vision blurred, a bright flash enveloped him. When he opened his eyes, he found himself in a grand cathedral, a priest standing before him. Bel looked at his hands in bewilderment. Where was he? How was he alive? He recognized the place, the Cathedral of Catastrophe. But how? Hadn't he just died? The priest's calm voice interrupted his thoughts. "We are about to begin the oracle ceremony." "Ceremony?" Bel repeated in shock. Did he travel back in time? The priest asked him to stretch out his hands and present his divine weapon. Bel's mind raced. At this moment in time, he had not yet found Avalon. He would have to start over, be banished again. But as he stretched out his hands, a bright blue flash illuminated the space. A snow-white scabbard appeared between his palms. Bel stared in disbelief. It was Avalon. He clutched the sheath, hope surging through him. He could start again, rewrite his fate. The gilded patterns on the scabbard glinted in the light, and the priest looked mildly surprised. "A divine scabbard is indeed a rarity," he remarked. Bel interrupted, determination hardening his voice. "Can I fight with this? Is that what you think?" The priest, slightly taken aback, replied, "Not at all." Bel left the cathedral, his resolve unwavering. He returned to the estate, his heart pounding with renewed purpose. If he had truly returned to the past, then Sarah must be alive. He dashed through the corridors, hope mingling with fear. This time, he would not fail. This time, he would protect her. Entering the grand estate, Bel felt a surge of familiarity and nostalgia. He pushed open the door to her room, and there she was, Sarah, alive and unscathed, sitting by the window. She heard the sound of the doors opening and immediately turned around, smiling brightly as she called out, "Belle." Seeing her radiant smile, he was filled with nostalgia, realizing how long it had been since he last saw his little sister. She was exactly as he remembered. Sarah jumped up from her chair, running joyfully towards him, and eagerly asked, "How did the ceremony go? What kind of weapon did you get?" Instead of answering, Belle simply hugged her tightly, his thoughts consumed with relief that she was safe. Sarah hugged him back, smiling, but then noticed something was off. "Is something wrong?" she asked gently. Belle remained silent, lost in his thoughts, apologizing to her silently. He couldn't protect her in his previous life. The memory of her lying on the floor, covered in blood, haunted him. He vowed that this time, he would prevent any tragedy. She would never experience pain or sadness again. He would not let anyone harm her. As he continued to hold her, Sarah suddenly winced and said, "You're hurting me." Belle, filled with worry, immediately let go and apologized. Sarah took a step back and laughed, assuring him, "Everything's fine. Your hugs just make me so happy." Then she noticed his tears. "Are you crying?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. She gently patted his head and said, "No matter what happens, everything will be okay because you have me." Belle was taken aback by her comforting words. Just then, the door burst open, and Zane entered. "Looks like the mongrels are getting along well," he sneered. He grinned at Belle and said, "I found out what happened." Sarah quickly hid behind her brother as Belle became wary. "Zane," he said, the name filled with caution. Zane grinned wider, his eyes gleaming with malice. "I heard everything," he said, stepping closer. "Something interesting happened at the ceremony, right?" Belle realized the priest must have told Zane everything. Lowering his head, Belle muttered, "I got the scabbard." Zane's face twisted with amusement before he burst into laughter, clutching his stomach. "A scabbard? That's not even a weapon. But for a half-breed mongrel like you, it makes sense." He sneered, "How are you going to fight with a scabbard? You two are just a couple of idiots." Belle clenched his fists, determined not to let Zane's words get to him. He would protect his sister, no matter what. "Take it back," Belle said. "Huh, did you say something?" Zane asked. "Take it back," I said. Zane clenched his hand into a fist and swung, aiming to teach Belle a lesson about respecting his elders. But this time, Belle didn't abide. He clenched his fist tighter and struck Zane hard under the chest. Zane gasped in pain, drool spraying from his mouth as he collapsed to his knees, unable to utter a word. Belle tilted his head, his voice cold. "I warned you. Never dare to insult Sarah again." Zane looked up, rage contorting his face. "You idiot," he shouted. Blue sparks ignited in his palm. "You shouldn't play with me." A spear materialized in his hands, and he took a fighting stance. "You're a useless idiot," he sneered. "I'll make you weep and beg for forgiveness. If you don't comply, I'll roast you like a pig on a spit." Belle glanced at the weapon, unimpressed. "A fire spear? Seriously?" he thought. "So be it," he said, extending his hand toward his sister. "Sarah, step back." Sarah called out to him worriedly, but Belle patted her on the head and smiled reassuringly. "Everything will be okay. Leave it to me." He extended one hand to the side, blue sparks crackling from his fingers, and summoned Evelyn, a snow-white sheath. Zane let out a chuckle. "Do you really think you can defeat me with a sheath? You're an E-rank paladin. You don't stand a chance." Flames erupted around Zane's spear as he pointed its tip at Belle. Belle remained silent, thinking about the paladin ranks. A newly minted paladin starts at F rank, and as they pour mana into their divine weapon, they advance to D rank, gaining the ability to use special attacks. To rise further, a paladin must awaken the unique abilities of their divine weapon. Zane was proud of achieving E rank at 14, but he still had much to learn. Belle grinned, which only made Zane angrier. "What are you laughing at?" Zane shouted. Belle's grin widened. "You're being cute." Furious, Zane swung his spear, flames blazing around him. "You're just a mudblood. I'll show you where you belong." Sarah's fear for her brother grew, and she called out to him, but Belle raised his other hand to the scabbard and commanded, "Sword of Light, appear." With a swift and light movement, he drew Caliban from its sheath. In an instant, he severed the tip of Zane's spear. Zane's eyes widened in shock, his face darkening as he stared at Caliban. "What kind of sword is this?" he muttered, unable to believe what had just happened. The severed tip of Zane's spear flew up and then crashed to the floor, piercing the ground between his legs. Zane hiccuped in fear, cold sweat dripping down his face. This is impossible," he whispered, his voice trembling. Belle approached Zane, his voice dripping with mockery. "What now? Are you going to make me cry and beg for forgiveness?" Zane, trembling with rage and shock, looked up at him. You tricked me. If I had known you had a weapon. He staggered to his feet, using the wall for support. You won't get away with this so easily, he spat, before quickly heading towards the exit. Bell raised his hand, his voice cold. Where are you going? We're not done yet. In an instant, a flaming Ragnarok pistol appeared in Bell's hand. He took aim and fired at Zane, who was trying to escape down the corridor. The loud crack of the gunshot echoed through the room. The bullet whizzed past Zane's face, embedding itself in the wall and leaving a gaping hole. Zane froze in his tracks, eyes wide with terror. He turned to look at the hole in the wall, then back at Bell, who was now lowering his gun and taking a step closer. Never contact Sarah or me again, Bell said, his voice steady and dangerous. He raised the gun once more, aiming it at Zane. Remember that. Zane, visibly shaken, stammered, if you touch her again, I'll put a bullet in your forehead. Zane screamed in fear and bolted, disappearing down the corridor. Bell sighed, holstered his weapon, and turned back to Sarah, who stood behind him, her mouth agape in surprise. Are you okay? Bell asked gently as he walked up to her. Sarah nodded, though her eyes were wide. I was so afraid he would hurt you again. Was that your divine weapon? Bell nodded. I didn't say you'd figure it out. Sarah smiled, admiration in her eyes. You're incredible. Bell returned her smile but then frowned, thinking to himself that he would never let anyone take that smile away from her. Meanwhile, Zane hurried to report everything to his father, the Duke. Is this true? The Duke gasped as Zane, still trembling, confirmed his words. My lord, Zane began, bowing his head, Bell has multiple divine weapons. The Duke, Gallion Caddis, stroked his beard thoughtfully. Interesting, he murmured. He rose from his chair and began to walk past his son. Surprised, Zane immediately turned. Where are you going? I'm going to visit Bell, Gallion replied, a slight smile playing on his lips. I need to see this for myself. Bell, having returned to his room, collapsed onto his bed with a sigh. He hugged his pillow, his mind racing. He had managed to defeat Zane, but he was still trapped in the body of a child. He looked at his small palm and thought about how much strength he had lost. Controlling his mana was difficult, and though he had intended to shoot a fire bullet, it had only come out as a regular one. At this moment, he was only as strong as an F rank. He closed his eyes, frustration washing over him. This can't go on any longer, he whispered to himself. The Roth-Windsor family attacked them. Roth-Windsor, another renowned family, had a long-standing feud with the Catastrophe family. The reasons for their assault could be varied. Bell looked at his hand, extended towards the ceiling, and recalled the dark silhouette that killed him and Sarah. He was certain it belonged to the Roth-Windsor family. This time, he vowed to protect his sister. Clenching his hand into a fist, Bell resolved to elevate his status within this house. Just as this thought crossed his mind, the door to his room opened with a creak. He turned his gaze towards the entrance, and the Duke walked in, saying it had been a long time since they'd seen each other. Bell jumped out of bed, his mind racing. Dad? But why? Gallion Catastrophe fought a great battle 20 years ago, single-handedly taking on the evil god and the infamous monster Tartaros. He traversed the Dark Continent, home to monsters, and was nicknamed the Holy Sword of Genesis. Zane followed the Duke into the room. Bell looked at Zane and understood immediately. Zane knew something. They stood at the door while the Duke approached Bell. Bell thought this was even better. The best way to improve his status was to get his father's attention. He knelt before the Duke and greeted him, saying it had been a long time. The Duke looked down at him and remarked that Bell had indeed changed. Today, he had come as his father and invited Bell to talk. Bell looked up, fearing that one wrong word could cause the conversation to spiral out of control. The Duke sighed thoughtfully, extended his hand towards Bell, and told him to rise. Bell obeyed, feeling the Duke's terrifying aura. The Duke turned to his two sons and asked if they had fought. He reminded them that fighting was forbidden in his house and questioned why Bell had hurt his brother, whom he should respect. The Duke's attention then turned to Bell, who grew very anxious and remained silent. Zane, standing behind his father, chuckled quietly, thinking this was the end for Bell. No one in the house could oppose their father. Bell noticed Zane's mocking look and frowned. Then he turned his gaze to his father and said he was angry because Zane had insulted his little sister. The Duke's face darkened slightly, and he said he understood, but Bell had broken the rules over a minor offense. Bell confirmed this and boldly added that he did not regret it. The Duke gripped the scabbard on his belt tighter and asked if Bell regretted breaking his rules. Bell confidently replied that abandoning those he loves is a real shame for a paladin. He would protect his sister, even if the enemy was his older brother. Listening to Bell, the Duke suddenly frowned. Bell then declared that this was his chosen path as a knight. In response, the Duke swiftly grabbed the hilt of his sword, drew it from its sheath, and pointed the tip at Bel's throat. "Even if your opponent is me?" the Duke asked. Bel answered confidently, "Yes, even if you were my opponent." Despite hearing these words, the Duke's expression did not change. Suddenly, he smiled slightly and said he liked it. He waved his hand and declared that he would act as if nothing had happened. Zane was clearly shocked. "Why?" he exclaimed. The Duke turned to Zane, displeased. "You not only lost to your brother in a duel but also bullied your sister." These words caused Zane to tremble slightly in fear. The Duke said Zane was a disgrace and ordered him not to show himself again. Zane left the room, but the Duke remained, eyeing Bel with a mixture of curiosity and sternness. "I understand you," the Duke began, his voice steady and authoritative. "It takes bravery to express your opinion, especially knowing the consequences." Bel lowered his head, a pang of guilt flashing across his features. "I ask for your forgiveness," he murmured. The Duke shook his head slightly. "Do not apologize. For a member of the Catastrophe family, this is commendable." He paused, his gaze intensifying. "Now, I want to see your strength. Show me your divine weapon." Bel nodded, bowing his head in acquiescence. He extended his hands forward, and blue sparks crackled between them. The Duke's eyes widened with a hint of worry as he watched. A sheath materialized in Bel's hands, glowing with an ethereal light. "This is my divine weapon, Avalon," Bel announced. The Duke's eyes widened further, astonishment evident on his face. "Is it possible? The legendary divine weapon containing the spirit of the first paladin?" He folded his arms, recalling the stories he had heard about this mythical weapon, passed down through generations of the greatest heroes. "Zane mentioned you used both a sword and a gun," the Duke said, his tone a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. Bel confirmed with a nod. "Yes, both are within this sheath." He lifted the sheath slightly, and with a bright blue flash, a sword and a pistol appeared in the air. The Duke's eyes widened in disbelief. Did he just summon a divine weapon from its sheath? "What is this?" Bel continued, "I can wield 2 weapons simultaneously, but there are 3 more types." This revelation left the Duke utterly astonished. He stared at Bel, realizing that his son had the potential to be a future hero. The Duke's expression hardened with resolve. "I have no interest in weaklings," he declared. "I expect a lot from you, work hard." Bel's eyes widened in surprise at his father's words. The Duke turned and left the room, the door slamming shut behind him. Bel collapsed onto the floor beside the bed, letting out a sigh of relief. His aura was so oppressive, he thought, but now he expects so much from me. Determination filled his eyes as he clenched his fist. "I must show my strength, even though I am still a child. I need to attain a higher rank and defeat as many monsters as possible to increase my mana." With newfound resolve, Bel decided to start by hunting orcs in the forest. Night fell, casting a dark shroud over the forest. In the middle of a clearing, the severed head of an orc lay, blood seeping from its wounds. The sound of claws scraping against the ground echoed through the trees as beasts approached the grisly scene, blood splashing beneath their feet. A large wolf walked past the corpses, its snow-white fur on its paws and belly stained with blood. The animal bared its teeth, revealing sharp fangs coated in crimson. Suddenly, the wolf turned sharply, growling loudly as its fur glowed under the light of the moon. The next morning, Bel ventured into the forest, the familiar surroundings evoking memories. He murmured to himself, "This forest brings back memories. After I was kicked out of my home in my previous life, I trained here for a while." He continued deeper into the woods, a sense of unease creeping over him. "Strange," he muttered, "I've gone to the very depths, where all the monsters dwell." Unbeknownst to him, red eyes watched from the bushes. He trudged on, puzzled that he hadn't encountered a single orc. Suddenly, Bel froze in place. Blood and severed limbs of monsters littered the ground ahead. A chill ran down his spine as he realized something was terribly wrong. Fear gripped him just as the sound of 4-legged footsteps and heavy breathing approached from behind. Bel spun around, drawing his sword in the nick of time to block an attack. The huge wolf jumped to the side, the force of the impact knocking Bel to the ground. Bel looked up, his heart pounding. "What is this?" he exclaimed. A massive wolf emerged, its red eyes gleaming ominously. Bel's mind raced. "It's Fenrir," he thought, recognizing the rare and formidable creature. Now he understood why he hadn't encountered any monsters. This beast had driven them away. He had hoped to hunt orcs, not face a D-rank monster. His mana reserves were nearly depleted. At best, his strength was equivalent to an E rank. Running seemed the most appealing option, but he knew turning his back on Fenrir would mean instant death. As Bel's thoughts raced, Fenrir watched him intently. The wolf's pupils suddenly narrowed, and Bel braced himself. He's going to attack, he realized. Fenrir lunged towards him with incredible speed, and Bel could barely react in time. Bel summoned his Ragnarok pistol, but Fenrir moved too swiftly, evading the bullets with ease. Damn it! Bel cursed, frustrated as his attack failed. Realizing that his bullets were too slow due to his depleted mana, he quickly decided to switch tactics. A sword materialized in his hand, and he thought, if the gun didn't work, then maybe this will. Without hesitation, Bel charged forward, meeting Fenrir's aggressive advance. As the beast lunged, swinging its massive paw, Bel narrowly dodged by sidestepping. Seizing the opportunity, he aimed a swift strike at Fenrir's side. However, the wolf retreated with remarkable agility and turned to face him again. Bel was taken aback by the creature's nimble maneuver. They stood in a tense standoff, and Bel's worry grew. In the past, I could have easily killed him, he thought. Fenrir charged again, baring its teeth and swinging its paw. Bel braced himself, thinking, I can't keep up with this speed. He managed to block the attack, mitigating the main damage but still receiving a deep cut on his leg from the Fenrir's claws. Gritting his teeth against the pain, Bel noticed the Fenrir beginning to circle him, preparing for another series of assaults. As the Fenrir delivered a barrage of strikes, Bel struggled to parry and reflect each blow. This is bad, he thought, feeling the weight of the battle bearing down on him. Fenrir attacked once more, and this time, Bel failed to parry the blow. He looked up just in time to see the Fenrir's massive jaws snapping dangerously close to his face. Panic surged through Bel. I just reincarnated, I can't die here. With a desperate thought, he summoned the Achilles shield and thrust it forward. To his shock, the wolf leaped over the shield, and Bel's eyes tracked its movement. Before he could react, Fenrir struck from behind, sending Bel sprawling to the ground. Bel's shield and sword clattered to the ground beside him. Gasping for breath, he thought, if this keeps up, I'm going to die. Pain coursed through his body from the numerous wounds, and he struggled to gather the strength to continue the fight. Fenrir loomed over him, a menacing shadow against the dim forest light, ready to deliver the final blow. Bel was certain he couldn't rely on brute strength alone, only one weapon remained. Clutching his sore shoulder, he muttered to himself, I have no choice. I'll have to use it. Sensing the rising threat, Fenrir immediately lunged, accelerating sharply and growling ferociously. Bel stood his ground, closing his eyes. As Fenrir swung its massive paw, Bel opened his eyes and called upon Aegis. The wolf's attack dispersed the purple haze that materialized around Bel's hand. Fenrir paused, staring intently at Bel, whose hand now bore a glove exuding a dark purple mist. I really didn't want to use this, Bel admitted, but in this situation, I have no other choice. Fenrir took a step forward, then accelerated again, closing the distance with alarming speed. But Bel was prepared. As the wolf lunged, jaws open wide, Bel swiftly dodged and leaped onto Fenrir's back. Apologizing to the beast, he readied his hammer, swung it over his shoulder, and struck Fenrir square in the face. The impact sent Fenrir reeling, a loud growl escaping its mouth as it sprayed saliva. Bel quickly dismounted, landing on the ground with agility. His weapon, the Aegis, was no ordinary glove, it was the glove of darkness, capable of instantly enhancing physical abilities and initiating a process of destruction. As this thought crossed Bel's mind, the glove began to glow red, his eyes mirroring the same hue. Fenrir, now enraged, launched another attack, growling louder than before. Bel felt the reinforcement from the glove growing stronger with each passing second. Facing the charging beast, Bel stood firm and declared, "Say goodbye to your life." He clenched his fist, feeling the immense power surging through him. As Bel struck the Fenrir repeatedly, a wide smile spread across his face. Time passed, and eventually, the wolf succumbed to its injuries, collapsing to the ground lifeless. Bel sighed in relief as he looked at Fenrir's motionless body. "Thank God I dealt with him quickly," he muttered. The glove on his hand disappeared, and Bel pondered the nature of the dark divine weapon. Its special abilities came at a cost. The longer he fought, the more it pulled him into the abyss of darkness. He sat down next to Fenrir's muzzle, contemplating the beast's presence. Where did Fenrir come from? He wasn't here before, Bel mused. No matter. There's no point in worrying about it now. His thoughts were interrupted when the hammer he had placed on the ground suddenly sparkled. A realization dawned on him. By defeating Fenrir, he could now harness the beast's attributes. Hunting strong monsters is more effective than hunting entire hordes of weak ones, he thought, eagerly anticipating his new powers. Some time later, not far from the estate, Sarah sat in the shade of tall trees, humming a melody. She happily held up a flower crown she had just finished crafting. Laughing, she wondered if her brother would like it. Suddenly, someone snatched the wreath from her hands, startling her. Jessica twirled the wreath, examining it with a sneer. "What kind of nonsense is this flower crown?" she mocked. A half-breed like you would find this suitable. Sarah called out to Jessica in fear, but Jessica ignored her, showing the crown to her servant, Spencer. What do you think of this? Jessica asked, her tone dripping with disdain. Spencer smiled and replied, the words you spoke are true. Jessica tossed the crown to the ground and called Spencer's name. He understood immediately, swinging his whip to cut the flower crown into 2 pieces. Flower petals scattered through the air, sparkling in the sunlight as Spencer's blue whip lashed out. Sarah gasped in confusion and dismay. Jessica extended 2 fingers towards her, a bored expression on her face. I'm incredibly bored, she declared. Let's have some fun. A gun appeared in Jessica's hand, which she pointed at Sarah. Smiling wickedly, she said, it's time for shooting practice. Jessica fired a shot, and Sarah, frightened by the sound, closed her eyes. Belle quickly came to her aid, deflecting the bullet with his scabbard. Why not let me join in your game, since you're already bored, he suggested, his tone calm but firm. Sarah, her eyes wide with surprise, turned to Belle. He smiled reassuringly. I was just looking for an opportunity to test my divine weapon. Jessica, displeased by the interruption, said, no mongrels getting in the way of my fun. Sarah, scared by her word, called out to her brother. Belle, comforting her, said, you must have been scared, don't worry, I am here now. Belle glared at Jessica. Spencer, insulting Belle, said, bastard, how dare he glare at Lady Jessica. Belle asked, is this the way he talks to son of the Duke? Spencer replied, why would I show respect to the children of a concubine? Jessica, mocking Belle, said, I know you luckily managed to defeat Zane. That idiot lost to a scabbard, but your luck won't work twice. Belle replied, why don't you check for yourself, if it's luck or something else? Jessica called out to Spencer. Deal with this garbage quickly, she ordered. Spencer waved his whip and smiled. Understood, he replied. As his whip hit the grass, a piece of ice immediately formed at the impact site. Belle eyed his opponent with displeasure. Spencer Gray was a D-rank paladin whose divine weapon was an ice whip, making him much stronger than Zane, who was merely an E-rank. Belle frowned at Spencer. I'll freeze your legs so you won't be able to escape, Spencer taunted. Then your arms and torso, so you won't lift a finger. With a nasty grin, he stretched the whip. And after that, I'll disfigure your face beyond recognition. Belle interrupted him. You talk too much, he said, his voice growing more furious. You'll pay for making Sarah cry. Spencer chuckled. Asshole, you shouldn't look at me like that, he sneered. He swung his whip, shouting, you'll soon turn into an icicle. The icy tip of the whip snaked towards Belle, but he dodged it just in time, recoiling to the side as the whip struck the ground. Jessica was shocked. As Spencer continued to swing the whip, Belle skillfully dodged each strike. For a D-rank, he's pretty good with his weapon, Belle thought, smiling to himself. Compared to the rigorous training he had undergone in his past life, this was child's play. Sarah watched in awe. Incredible, she murmured, admiring Belle's movements. It's like he's dancing. Spencer, growing increasingly angry, snapped irritably, you're just running away. Belle's smile widened. Is that so? He said. Then I won't dodge anymore. His voice was filled with resolve. All 3 opponents were taken aback by his words, their curiosity piqued as they waited to see what would happen next. Spencer leaned forward, shouting, you're an idiot. Even dumber than I thought. If that's what you want, I'll freeze you dead. He sharply waved his hand, sending the icy tip of the whip towards Belle. But Belle merely spread his arms wide, indicating he was ready to take the blow. As the whip struck Belle's body repeatedly, he maintained a smile, his eyes locked on Spencer. Sarah, watching in horror, called out to him, but Belle remained still. The blows of the whip encased his legs in ice, and soon his body and hands were frozen as well. Spencer grinned triumphantly. Now you're immobilized, he taunted. Just as he was about to say more, Belle interrupted him. Is that all you can do? Belle asked, his smile unwavering. It's my turn now. Spencer's grin vanished, replaced by wariness. Belle glanced at his frozen hand and called upon Ragnarok. The snow-white sheath on his belt sparkled, and suddenly, the divine weapon appeared in his hand, shattering the ice around it. Spencer's eyes widened in disbelief. A second divine weapon, he exclaimed. Belle pointed the gun at his other hand and released his mana. He fired, and with a loud ringing sound, the bullet pierced the ice, freeing him from his icy shackles. I can move again, Belle declared. Jessica, watching from a distance, was stunned and worried. Why does he have 2 weapons? How can he use their attributes, she thought, her disbelief growing. Belle aimed the gun at Spencer. It's time to pay for what you've done, he said, a flame flickering at the tip of the gun's muzzle. Spencer cursed, growing very nervous. In a desperate bid to protect himself, he struck the ground with his whip, causing a massive piece of ice to rise before him, serving as a shield. He laughed mockingly. "What now? Try to hit me through this thickness of ice." Bell replied calmly, "As easy as shelling peas." Immediately after these words, he fired the fiery bullet. It shot forward, piercing the thick ice barrier and heading straight for Spencer. Before Spencer could react, he saw a bright flash. The fiery bullet struck him in the stomach, and he screamed in agony, collapsing to the ground. The impact threw Spencer back, and he fell next to Jessica, who was visibly frightened. Her thoughts raced. He broke through the ice. Is he really stronger than a D-rank? I am only an E-rank. I have no chance. Bell walked toward her, and she froze in fear. It's over, Bell declared. In a panic, Jessica stretched her hand forward, summoning her gun. She pointed the trembling weapon at him, her entire body shaking with fear. Go away, she yelled. She pulled the trigger several times, firing bullets at Bell, but they all missed their mark. Unable to defend herself, Jessica backed away, pleading for him to leave her alone. Suddenly, she stumbled and fell to the ground, wincing in pain. Bell approached her, his presence imposing. Jessica looked up, her eyes filled with terror. He loomed over her, a dark figure with blue sparkling eyes. Don't ever dare to approach Sarah again, he warned. Jessica's eyes widened with fear, tears welling up. Unable to bear his gaze, she scrambled to her feet and ran towards the estate, screaming in terror. Sarah, witnessing the scene, ran up to Bell and hugged him tightly, gratitude evident in her embrace. Are you okay? You're not injured, are you? She asked, her voice filled with concern. Bell, slightly surprised by her sudden hug, replied, Everything's fine. The main thing is that you're safe. Sarah smiled up at him. You're so strong, she said. Bell smiled back. I'll become even stronger to protect you. Suddenly, Sarah remembered the flower crowns. She handed one to Bell, saying, I made these wreaths. There isn't another one, but please take the one I made for myself. Bell knelt down, and Sarah placed the wreath on his head. Thank you for always protecting me, she said softly. Bell felt the flower wreath on his head and thought, a gift from Sarah. He smiled widely, realizing that one day the whole nation might honor such a gift. However, he knew there were still problems ahead. Even the knights despised them for being the children of a concubine. Though he had defeated Jessica and Zane, it wouldn't change the fact that they would continue to bully Sarah. As her sibling, he resolved to assert his status in the house to protect her. He would show everyone that he was strong enough to defend his sister, no matter the challenges they faced. Time passed, and the Duke was training near the estate. He held his sword at the ready, his eyes closed in concentration. He heard the fluttering of tree leaves and suddenly swung his sword sharply, slicing the leaf into thin pieces. As he completed his swing, he noticed Bell standing behind him. What do you need? The Duke asked, his voice stern. Bell, with resolve, replied, I want to ask your permission for something important. The Duke's eyes narrowed in curiosity. Bell knelt before him, looking up with unwavering confidence. I seek permission to take the C-rank exam, he stated clearly. The Duke raised an eyebrow. You want to take the exam, he repeated. Yes, Bell confirmed. I wish to serve the king as a member of our family. In exchange for the royal family's recognition of our status, we are obliged to fulfill their tasks, protecting important individuals, destroying monsters, and more. The fastest way for me to increase my status in the family is to achieve difficult tasks, and to accept those tasks, I need a higher rank. The Duke looked at him with a cold gaze. You want to serve? I see you are full of ambition, he said. But it's too early. You need to become a full paladin before reaching C rank. Hearing this, Bell began to untie the knot of the bag he was carrying on his back. The Duke continued, right now, you are only F rank. You just received your weapon. If you want to increase your rank, you should start with the E rank exam. Bell finished untying the bag and took out a large fang, placing it on the ground before the Duke. With a confident smile, he asked, would this change your mind? The Duke's eyes widened in surprise. Fenrir's fang, he asked suspiciously. How did you get it? Bell extended one hand forward, summoning a weapon. A hammer appeared next to him, sparkling with energy. He threw it over his shoulder and replied with a smile, with difficulty, but I managed to defeat that mongrel. The Duke was taken aback, realizing what this meant. Can he use attributes? He thought. This means he received special features for his weapons and defeated Fenrir alone. Bell is clearly stronger than C rank. After a few moments of contemplation, the Duke looked at his son and said, very well. I will allow you to take the exam. Bell's face lit up with gratitude and determination. Thank you, father, he said. The Duke nodded, his expression softening just a fraction. Do not disappoint me, he warned. I won't, Bell promised, feeling more determined than ever to prove his worth and protect his family. Time passed, and Bell finally arrived at the bustling square where all the exam candidates had gathered. As he approached, he overheard some of them talking. "Look at all these applicants," one of them sighed. "There are so many of us, and they say the C-rank exam is a kind of ceiling. There are casualties every year." Another replied, "I wonder how the exam will go this time." Bell walked past these groups, and their chatter quieted as they turned to look at him with surprised glances. One of the guys called out, "Is there a child here?" Ignoring the stares, Bell approached the table where a young woman was accepting applications. "Do they accept applications here?" he asked. The woman looked up, clearly taken aback by the sight of Bell. Confused, she asked, "Do you have an attendant with you?" Bell shook his head. "No, I want to take the exam." The woman's eyes widened in surprise. She slammed her palms on the table and exclaimed, "You'll have to come back later when you're older." Bell's expression hardened, a hint of irritation in his voice as he said, "Even if you treat me like a child, I'm also a paladin." Before she could respond, a red-haired guy in a raincoat appeared beside them. "Stop playing paladin, kid," he said dismissively. Bell turned to face the newcomer, feeling an uneasy sensation creep over him. The red-haired man continued, "Little children don't belong here. Get out of here." As Bell sized him up, the other candidates began to murmur among themselves. "Is that Lennox Bright?" one of them asked. "The strongest D-rank paladin? His divine weapon is the wind sword, right? They say it can strike 8 times with each swing. Incredible." Lennox overheard their discussion and smiled smugly. He turned back to Bell and said, "If you want to get a C rank, you need to be at least a little strong. Like me." Bell felt a surge of caution and wondered, is this guy the strongest at this rank? Lennox walked up to Bell, bending down to match his eye level. "Do you even have a divine weapon?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. Bell met his gaze steadily and showed him the avalanche sheath. "Of course, I have a weapon." Lennox stared at the scabbard for a moment before bursting into laughter. He laughed so hard he had to throw his head back, unable to contain his amusement. "What is this?" he exclaimed between laughs. "A sheath? You can't be serious." Despite the ridicule, Bell stood firm. The other examinees also began to laugh, one of them jeering, "Is there really such a useless divine weapon?" A girl standing next to him chimed in, "Thank God I wasn't born so worthless." The smile on Lennox's face vanished. He looked at Bell with an arrogant expression and said, "I don't mind if an ignorant child like you wants to die here." Twisting a lock of hair around his finger, Lennox smirked. "I don't like that your participation in this exam might put us on equal terms." He turned and walked toward the arena, waving his hand dismissively. "You should run back to your mommy." Ignoring the taunts, Bell approached the girl at the registration desk again. "Register me immediately," he demanded. She was still astonished. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "Yes," Bell confirmed. "I am." The girl explained, "To participate, you need to be a D-rank paladin or have a letter of recommendation from a B-rank paladin or higher." Bell handed her a letter. "With this letter, I can definitely participate. That's what the rules say." She unfolded the letter, thinking, who would recommend this child? But as she read it, her eyes widened in shock. "This is a letter from Duke Galleon Catastrophic. Is this boy really the son of a duke?" With that, Bell was registered for the exam and headed into the arena. There, a knight stood on a small platform. One of them stepped forward to explain the exam. "First, we will use the teleportation stone to go to the dungeon. You need to retrieve the life gem on the 5th floor within 5 hours. There are 3 of these stones in total, and only 3 people who complete the task will receive a C rank." One of the examinees asked, "Only 3 people?" Lennox, with a smug smile, declared, "I'll be one of them." The rest of the participants looked at him strangely but remained silent. Bell glanced at Lennox, then back at the knight. The knight asked, "Is everyone ready?" In response, all the examinees joyfully raised their weapons. "Then the exam begins," the knight announced. It was Bell's turn to teleport. He climbed onto the platform and extended his hand forward, touching the teleportation stone. The engraved mark on it glowed, and Bell was instantly teleported. He found himself in a completely different space, falling through the air. A second later, a bright flash illuminated the cave around him. Bell glanced around, rose to his feet, and quickly assessed his surroundings. It seemed they had been sent to different places on this floor. "Where should I go?" he thought, looking down the dimly lit corridor ahead of him. The dungeon was enormous, but Bell was confident that 5 hours would be enough to clear it if he didn't waste time. There were many monsters in the dungeon, and as a paladin, his mana would grow stronger with each monster he defeated. With this in mind, Bell drew his sword, preparing for battle. A determined smile crossed his face. "Time to kill them all," he murmured. Meanwhile, in another part of the dungeon, several paladins had formed a group and were battling a swarm of armed lizards blocking their path. The first lizard lunged at one of them, who managed to dodge just in time. The monster's red eyes sparkled in the twilight of the cave as it opened its mouth, revealing sharp teeth. The sight sent a shiver down the spines of the paladins, causing them to freeze in place. Suddenly, Lennox's voice rang out nearby. "Pathetic," he scoffed. With a single swing of his wind sword, he sliced the monster into several pieces. The other paladins looked on in awe. "He's amazing," one guy exclaimed, his face lighting up with admiration. A girl beside him added, "I'm ready to fall in love with him." Lennox, basking in their adulation, moved on to the rest of the monsters. He swung his sword again, dismembering another lizard with ease. Annoyed, he turned to the paladins and said, "I'm not like you." He continued down the corridor, and the group followed him. "It's a pity," one of the guys said, "but unfortunately, this is how it is." "Thanks to him, we were able to get through," the girl remarked. Lennox laughed. "Then look at me with envy," he said with a grin. "Weaklings should act like weaklings." At this rate, they soon reached a huge door at the end of the corridor. The team stopped, gazing up at the tall door. Lennox turned to them and declared, "This is the last room." While opening the door he said, "I hope I find something interesting inside." As soon as door opened they saw several types of monsters inside. And there were also a lot of D-rank monsters. One of the team members noticed an altar at the end of the room, atop which lay 3 blue shining stones. "Look, over there," he called out, warning the others. As the group turned their attention to the stones, a massive stone golem began to move toward them. Lennox, eager to prove himself, decided to attack first. "I'll smash it to pieces," he declared confidently. Swinging his wind sword, he unleashed several powerful wind blows, but they had no effect on the monster. The golem continued to advance, undeterred. "Is he made of diamond?" Lennox exclaimed in frustration. The stone golem swung its massive arm and struck Lennox in the face with all its strength, sending him flying back and rolling across the ground. Gasping for breath, Lennox looked up in disbelief. "My sword doesn't cut through," he shouted. The other paladins were equally shocked, unable to comprehend how this could happen. Monsters began to attack from all sides. "They're attacking us now," someone yelled. A guy swung his mace, landing a direct hit on a monster's head and splitting it in two. But as soon as he raised his weapon, the monster immediately regenerated. "What does this mean? Don't such blows work on them," he cried out in despair. Meanwhile, a girl was swinging a fiery sword, trying to reach a harpy perched on the ceiling. "I can't reach her with my sword," she shouted. Suddenly, the harpy flapped its wings, sending a powerful stream of air that extinguished her flames and knocked her off balance. Lennox, just getting to his feet, thought to himself, "Is this the last room of the exam for C rank?" He looked at the stone golem looming before him and realized that the monsters must have resistance to certain weapons. The stone golem approached again, raising its hand to strike. Lennox, realizing he couldn't injure it, closed his eyes, bracing for the worst. "They're going to kill us," he thought. But just in time, Bell arrived. With a powerful swing of his hammer, he smashed the stone golem into small fragments. The loud impact echoed through the room, and Lennox opened his eyes, astonished to see Bell standing before him. "Almost late," Bell said with a smile, placing his foot on the shattered head of the golem. "I got too carried away with hunting." Lennox exclaimed in astonishment, "You're that same boy." He continued to stare at Bell in surprise, but his attention was quickly diverted by a slime monster approaching from behind Bell. Blue sparks danced around Bell's hand as he drew his sword and rushed to attack. Seeing the new weapon in Bell's hand, Lennox gasped, "Did his weapon change?" Bell swung his sword, effortlessly slicing the slime monster in half. Just then, the harpy decided to attack, flapping her wings and sending sharp fragments toward him. Bell swiftly pulled out a gun, aiming it at the harpy. He pulled the trigger several times, each shot creating large holes in the harpy's body. The paladin stood aside, watching in awe. "Is he serious?" one of the guys asked. "Is his weapon not just a sword?" the girl exclaimed in surprise. Lennox continued to watch, bewildered by the number of weapons Bell wielded. "Where does he get so many weapons from?" he wondered aloud. Bell, now armed with both a sword and a pistol, moved toward the remaining monsters. "There's almost no time left," he said. "We need to finish this quickly." He began to circle the room, expertly handling the monsters with his sword while simultaneously firing bullets at them. Lennox watched in shock, realizing that Bell did not seem like a mere child. Soon, Bell had dispatched all the monsters, cutting off the upper part of the last one's body with a final swing. Bell then climbed the stairs leading to the altar, the other examinees following him in awe. At the top, he looked at the 3 sparkling spheres and asked, "Are these the life gems?" The rest of the examinees gathered around him, filled with admiration. "How did you defeat them all alone?" one of them asked. "How does he carry so many weapons?" another wondered. Bell didn't answer, he merely gave them a dissatisfied look. The paladins turned to Lennox, their irritation clear. "Compared to him, you acted so self-confident, but you lost." "You're just a weakling," one of them said. "It's true," another added. "It wasn't cool at all." Lennox remained silent, unable to respond to their words. The others suddenly remembered the spheres and exclaimed with excitement, "We're now C rank." Bell, however, had a different plan. He summoned his hammer and looked at the remaining spheres on the altar. With a sharp swing, he smashed the altar, shattering all the remaining spheres. The paladins were shocked by his actions. "What did he do? Why did he break everything?" they exclaimed in disbelief. Bell held up the single sphere he had taken earlier and said, "There's only one left here. If you want it, take it." He glared at the paladins, his voice filled with disdain. "You're scum, incapable of anything other than flattering the strong." Turning his gaze to Lennox, who stood hesitantly beside him, Bell continued, "And you're a scumbag who enjoys humiliating others. None of you are worthy to be called knights." Lennox and the others were stunned and shamed by his words. They all fell silent as Bell began to descend the stairs. Suddenly, Lennox spoke up. "I understand. I was a weakling, but I was so self-confident. I'm grateful you made me realize it," he admitted. Looking at Bell with a determined expression, he added, "I won't stop, though." Bell glanced at him, recognizing the honesty and ambition in Lennox's eyes. He hadn't expected this. With a confident stride, he walked towards the exit. "I understand. Then we'll meet again someday," he said. After leaving the dungeon, Bell officially received his C rank. He sat down on a stone fence, looking at his hand with a smile. "Thanks to the monsters, my magical power has become stronger," he mused. He looked up, thinking of the next challenge. Only Sarah remains, he thought. Meanwhile, in a grand mansion, Duke Catastrophic had gathered a council. One man spoke urgently, "I understand everything. The knightly organization Karma is plotting a royal coup." The Duke confirmed his words, saying, "They're approaching our kingdom with 3 B-rank knights at their head. Their destruction is the mission of the Catastrophe family." Another man, sitting next to him, added, "It looks like they've already defeated Duke Schrabe." "Is that Duke Schrabe?" another council member asked, his voice filled with concern. "They say they strengthened their weapons with the Forbidden Book of Pentagram. That's why the B-rank knights have gathered here," one man said urgently. The Duke agreed, "We need to keep our eyes open. We will defeat them." The man glanced at the empty chair in front of him and asked, "Where is young Master Jean?" Suddenly, the door swung open, and someone threw a book of pentagram onto their table. A young man turned to his father and asked, "So this is what he was talking about?" All present turned their surprised glances toward the door. There stood a long-haired young man exuding a dark aura. With a smile, he declared, "I've recently destroyed this organization. I will be the next Duke." After some time, a maid came to Sarah's room, placing a tray of bread and water on the table. "This is your lunch," she said curtly. Sarah smiled awkwardly and thanked her, but the maid paid no attention and walked out, closing the door behind her. As soon as she left, the smile on Sarah's face faded, and she looked sadly at the bread in front of her. She lowered her gaze, lost in her thoughts. Suddenly, the door to her room opened, and Bell entered with a box in his hands. "I'm back," he said with a smile. Seeing him, Sarah's face lit up. She clapped her hands joyfully and called out his name. She jumped out of bed and ran to him, asking, "Where have you been? I was so worried." Bell apologized and explained, "I had some business to take care of. But I brought you something." He laid out the fried chicken, pie, and apples from the box. Sarah was overjoyed, clapping her hands. "Apple pie. Thank you, Bell." She invited him to eat together. As Bell watched her smile, he thought, "She's so cute. But there's no time to be moved." He glanced at the tray of simple food the maid had brought and thought, as usual, they brought her a plain lunch. Probably because the old servants don't like the concubine's children. Sarah began to eat the pie, tears of happiness in her eyes. Bell thought to himself, "I need to quickly start working to improve her life." Meanwhile, the meeting in the Duke's chamber continued. The Duke looked at his son and asked, "Did you defeat Karma alone?" Naming him Jean, he said that he had achieved a great feat. Jean, the eldest son of the Catastrophe family, smiled. Next to him stood his loyal servant, Laser. The men around the table smiled and praised him. "This is to be expected from the eldest son of the Duke of Gallion," one said. The man sitting next to him agreed, adding, "You're on another level." Jean took his seat and asked, "So, what is today's topic?" His father replied, "There's another mission from the king. This mission is to protect Princess Ricochet Tagvillain. Lady Rika must travel safely. Our job is to assign her a knight to guard her and ensure her safe passage. A man at the table asked, are there not enough knights from the palace? Laser responded, if it weren't for Karma, there wouldn't be a need for additional security. The man said, then we must ensure her safety. I think the safest route will be through Mount Ricotta. Suddenly, there were footsteps in the corridor. Bell entered the meeting room and loudly said, wait. All eyes immediately turned to him, and silence reigned in the room. A man looked at him in surprise and asked, young Master Bell? The Duke smiled slightly upon seeing him, but the smile quickly disappeared. It looks like the exam is already over, he remarked. Bell showed him the document confirming his achievement and announced, I have received rank C. The others were very surprised and exclaimed, at this age, rank C? The Duke asked, so what? What do you want? Bell replied, I have some advice about the route. A man asked in disbelief, you have advice? Bell said, there are no monsters on Mount Ricotta, but it's an excellent place for bandits to hide. If they travel along a road in the mountains, it will take 3 days to traverse. I think they should drive through the monster meadow. The man exclaimed displeasedly, a meadow of monsters? That's a nest of danger. Bell replied, that's not the case. Mostly dead chimera and dark spirits live in this meadow. These two types of monsters are mainly active at night. If they travel during the day, it will be safe, and they can reach their destination in just a day. After listening to Bell's proposal, a man at the table thoughtfully remarked that it was true. The Duke looked at his son and thought that Bell was well informed. When everyone else fell silent, Bell stepped forward and said, let me handle this mission. I will deliver the princess quickly and safely. The Duke looked at him thoughtfully and did not answer, but suddenly Jean called out to Bell. A dark aura immediately thickened around Jean, and he told Bell, with a sneer, mongrel, don't meddle in our business. From the dark aura emanating from him, the flower on the table immediately withered, and the others in the room grew nervous. Bell clenched his teeth, feeling the oppressive greatness that Jean exuded. He hadn't seen him for a long time, but the eldest son was different from everyone else. Bell clenched his hand into a fist, collected his thoughts, and then called forth Avalon. A sheath appeared in his hand, and he said resolutely, no matter who stands against me, I will still protect the princess. Jean looked at him with a terrifying gaze and asked with a smile, even if it's me against you? Bell replied emphatically, I will not change my mind. Laser, Jin's servant, suddenly warned Bell to be careful. Bell took it as an insult. He looked at Laser and thought that he was Jin's servant, a rank B paladin. Jean grinned, his red eyes sparkling, and said, interesting. He turned to his servant and said, check him. After the order, a weapon appeared in Laser's hands. Preparing for battle, Laser said he understood. He looked at Bell with irritation and thought, how dare he contradict Jean? Now he will show him his strength. Laser sharply rushed forward and disappeared from Bell's field of vision, as if vanishing into thin air. A second later, he reappeared, already very close. He raised his hand to strike. Bell became very worried when he saw him so close and cursed in his thoughts. Laser struck, but Bell managed to draw his sword in time and block the attack. Laser was surprised that the child blocked his attack, and Jean grinned. Bell was nervous and thought, I almost missed it. He's faster than I thought. I can't defeat him just yet. They were about to continue, but suddenly the Duke raised his voice and told them to stop. Bell froze in place, feeling the pressure from his father. After this, the Duke calmly said that he was entrusting this mission to Bell. Laser turned around in astonishment and asked, my lord, are you sure about this? The Duke replied that he thought Bell was capable of this mission since Karma had already been eradicated. Laser retreated, and Bell put his weapon away. Bell said, thank you father, I won't disappoint you. Jean continued to observe his little brother with a bored expression, but suddenly a horrible smile twisted his face. On a bright sunny day, Bell arrived at the royal palace. Bell looked around, taking in the grandeur of a place he had never seen in his previous life. He approached the gate, which was guarded by 2 stern guards. When they saw the young boy, they hastened to stop him, sternly informing him that he should not be there. With a calm demeanor, Bell showed them his rank and stated that he was there on a mission. My name is Bell Catastrophe, he announced. The guards looked at him doubtfully, examining his insignia. They exchanged glances, murmuring amongst themselves about whether this child could truly be a C-rank paladin. One of the guards raised his hand to signal the others, and they reluctantly opened the gate to let Bell inside. As he walked past them, the guards watched him go, wondering aloud if this child would really be the princess's new guard. Bell, however, paid no attention to their words. He walked confidently forward, his eyes scanning the surroundings. Ahead, he saw a carriage with a princess standing beside it and knights kneeling on one knee in her presence. The princess noticed the young boy approaching and remarked with mild amusement about having such a young guard. With a dismissive gesture, she placed her hands on her belt and apologized, saying she wouldn't need his services. Belle, undeterred by her cold reception, continued his approach. Meanwhile, in a distant, unknown location, a young man sat on a throne. Before him, a servant knelt, wearing a mask that concealed his identity. The young man inquired if Rika had already set off. The masked servant confirmed that she had, mentioning that she would be guarded by several palace knights and the duke's son, Belle. The young man mused, Catastrophic's youngest son, is it? He seems very young but quite talented. We must remain vigilant around him. He gave his servant permission to act if necessary, emphasizing the importance of their mission. The servant, with a wicked grin, squeezed several blades between his fingers and assured his master that he understood, adding that killing was his profession. Back at the palace, the carriage began its journey, rolling out of the castle gates. Inside, Belle sat with the princess and two knights. Belle understood the gravity of his mission, which was to accompany the princess to a significant ceremony. He thought about his little sister, promising himself not to make any mistakes. As he turned his gaze to the princess, who was staring out the window, he wondered about her earlier comment that she didn't need him. Deciding to start a conversation, he asked her what she meant by that. The princess did not answer immediately, and for a moment, the sound of the carriage wheels was the only noise. Finally, she looked at him leisurely and replied that she simply didn't want to get attached to anyone. She looked away, folding her arms, and added that she had her own weapons and was not so weak as to be unable to defend herself. Belle replied awkwardly, I understand. He thought to himself that she was more arrogant than he had expected. The princess resumed her gaze out the window as they passed through a busy street. Merchants were selling their wares, and performers entertained the crowds. Suddenly, the princess's attention was caught by a man skillfully juggling balls. She moved closer to the window with a smile, clearly entertained by the performance. Belle, noticing this, smiled and let out a small laugh. The princess immediately turned to him with a frown, asking what was so funny. Belle apologized quickly and explained, I was just remembering my little sister. She would have reacted the same way. The princess seemed to soften slightly at his words but quickly turned her attention back to the window, maintaining her dignified composure. The princess's curiosity was piqued, and after a brief pause, she asked Belle if he often played with his sister. Belle nodded affirmatively, explaining, yes, we do it often. She's still small, so for now, we mostly play at home together and so on. Rika, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, gazed out the window again. For me, it's the other way around, she said. I have many brothers in the palace, but I can only trust myself. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange, Belle pondered aloud, are they all fighting for the title? He then shared, it's the same for me. Our older siblings bully us because we're children of a concubine. Our mother died, and we have nobody to protect us. So, we can only protect each other. The princess remained silent, her eyes fixed on Belle. He smiled at her, saying, unfortunately, I understand how lonely you must feel. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask me. Reich looked away, replying coolly, I'm not going to count on anyone, especially not you. And don't speak as if you understand everything. It's disrespectful to me. Meanwhile, at the gates of the city they were heading towards, a group of masked and hooded figures hid in the shadows. Time passed, and night fell. The carriage finally arrived at its destination, and one of the hidden figures whispered that they had arrived as planned. The princess stepped out of the carriage, stretching her lower back and complaining, I'm so tired from the trip. The iron gates creaked open, and several knights, led by a fair-haired young man, approached the carriage. Lady Reich, he called, welcoming her. She looked at him, asking who he was. With a slight smile, he introduced himself, I am Peter Fred, the leader of the knightly group here. We thank you from the bottom of our hearts for coming. Belle scrutinized Peter, thinking his name sounded familiar. He glanced around their surroundings, finding it odd that they were being met outside the city. Fixing his gaze on the foliage of a nearby tree, he sensed something was off. At that moment, the group of masked figures hiding behind the bushes began to move, ready to spring into action. The knightly group, the princess, and their escort stood in place, an uneasy silence hanging over them. Belle sensed something was amiss. There were plenty of guards, but something felt wrong. Suddenly, a sharp glint caught his eye. A man perched in a tree hurled a knife straight towards the princess. In an instant, Belle realized the danger. The princess is too exposed outside the castle, he thought. Summoning his sheath, he swiftly knocked the knife away, shielding the princess from harm. The sudden attack startled her, and her knights quickly realized they were under assault. Knives flew at them from all directions. Someone shouted, "Enemy attack!" The blades were all aimed at the princess, an unavoidable barrage. Belle glanced at the sky, noting the sheer number of knives. Peter reacted immediately, drawing his sword with a shout, "Scoundrels!" He dashed to the princess's side, skillfully deflecting the incoming knives with swift swings. His gaze turned stern as he vowed, "I won't let them touch the princess." Belle pursed his lips and frowned, thinking, able to fend off so many knives? Is this an B-rank skill? The attackers began to descend from the trees, retreating. Peter noticed and shouted, "They're leaving. Catch them immediately." He then stood protectively in front of the princess, signaling for the knights to pursue the attackers while he guided her to safety. Belle stayed at the gate, keeping watch, as Peter led the princess towards the castle. As she was being led away, she cast a worried glance back at Belle. After some time, they reached a warehouse. The knight assured the princess, "We're safe here. The area around the palace is protected by my colleagues." The princess folded her arms across her chest in displeasure. "I don't need protection. I can handle this myself," she insisted. The knight, determined, exclaimed, "That's impossible. Even if it costs us our lives, we will protect you." The knight did not have time to finish his sentence. A sharp blade swiftly cut his throat. His body fell to the floor with a clatter of armor, and the princess stared in shock at the corpse before her. The killer revealed himself to be Peter, holding the bloodied blade. Rika's face paled with realization and fear, understanding she was trapped. She stood frozen in place. Peter closed his eyes and mocked, "Even if it costs them their lives." He then smiled cruelly and said, "Their lives are too cheap." The princess, fear evident in her eyes, asked who he really was. Peter let out a questioning sigh and then grinned widely, enunciating each word slowly, "I am an assassin." The horror overwhelmed the princess, and her legs gave way, causing her to collapse to the floor. Peter began to approach her slowly. She crawled backward, eyes wide with terror, stretching out a hand to summon a weapon, but nothing happened. Her hand trembled violently. Peter looked down at her with a mad smile and told the princess to say goodbye to her life. Cold sweat appeared on Rika's face. She was so scared that she silently begged for someone to save her. Suddenly, there was a response to her plea, glass shattered, and the corpse of a man flew inside. Peter immediately turned around, displeased, demanding to know what was happening. He glanced down and saw the body of one of the attackers from the gate. A second later, Belle appeared in the broken window. His blue eyes sparkled in the darkness, and the moonlight streaming into the room illuminated Rika's face, now transformed from fear to surprise. Belle smiled when he noticed her gaze and said, "Lady Rika, I have come. Thank you for waiting." The princess, still in shock, murmured his name in surprise. Belle then jumped down, landing inside the room, and declared, "I'll handle this myself." Peter tooted in displeasure, saying, "I thought the guards were far away. Strange, but now I realize you are the enemy. You're quite capable." Belle replied, "I just remembered something about you." Peter frowned and asked, "What did you remember?" With a confident smile, Belle answered, "Your name is One Wriggle." Hearing Belle's words, Peter, revealed to be One Wriggle, was visibly shocked. He had not expected Belle to know so much about him. Belle continued, "You use 3 sets of lightning bolts as weapons. Your former targets include Count Slave Bermont and Marquis Rysbart." Vaughn frowned, his expression turning nervous. "How do you know all this?" he demanded. In his thoughts, Belle recalled seeing Van in a past life. Aloud, he said, "I didn't think you would go so far as to decide to kill the princess. Do you really think you can hide behind the head of the knights?" One clenched his teeth and looked away, pondering his next move. Suddenly, he laughed, telling Belle, "You hardly know me. Do you think you'll surprise me with your rank?" Belle agreed, "It would be difficult for me to defeat an opponent with a B rank. But with you, it's a completely different matter." Van immediately drew his knives, placing them between his fingers. "Who do you take me for?" he exclaimed. Belle frowned, thinking that the first attack would likely involve throwing knives. As expected, Van suddenly waved his hands and threw all his knives at Belle. Belle concentrated, quickly dodging by crouching and moving to the side. At the same time, he advanced closer to Van. Van, taken aback by Belle's agility, swung his knife in a slanting blow, but Belle anticipated it and dodged. Van was surprised to see Belle easily avoiding his attacks. One abruptly moved behind Belle, but Belle was already aware of his maneuver. Summoning his weapon, Belle intercepted Van's attack. "I know all your movements in advance," Belle said. One remained silent, struggling to understand how Belle managed to react so swiftly. Belle smiled, "I could kill you whenever I want, but if you want to live, surrender now." One froze, processing Belle's words. Suddenly, he let out a chuckle that quickly turned into a furious shout, "I'll destroy you." Belle smiled, satisfied that he had provoked the reaction he wanted. Your attacks are going to become simpler now that you're angry. This is your flaw, he thought. As one lunged at him in a blind rage, Bell effortlessly dodged all his attacks. The fight was now heavily in Bell's favor, and he knew it was only a matter of time before he subdued his opponent. First, there was a push, followed by a cut, then an oblique blow, and only after that did Van throw a knife. Finally, he would launch strikes from below. Bell knew all this. As Van attacked, Bell continued to evade with ease. The princess watched in surprise, thinking how small Bell was but already capable of handling a skilled killer like Van. Van attacked again, and Bell effortlessly parried the blow with his sword. Rika continued to watch, realizing how much she had underestimated Bell. The gem on her ring sparkled in the moonlight as Bell sharply swung his sword and shouted, "This is the end." He then lowered his sword, and Van, caught off guard, took the blow. Blood sprayed from his wound, and feeling the pain, he decided to increase the distance, gritting his teeth and staring at Bell. Van thought, he knows all my movements. How can this be? He recalled the young man's words about Bell's talent and his advice to stay on guard. Suddenly, he smiled and said, "Time for a backup option." Bell frowned, thinking, is he talking about the ability of B-rank weapons and above? The ability to create a stopping electric barrier? He decided to take a defensive stance and told Van to attack, confident he could withstand his strength. Van took out a bottle of potion and grinned. "Is that true?" he taunted. Uncorking the bottle, Bell noticed the blue potion inside and was surprised. Van drank the contents, saying, "You seem to know about the tears of the Dragon King." As he swallowed everything, he threw the bottle away, and it hit the wooden floorboards with a thud. The potion began to take effect. Van grabbed his chest, feeling a surge of strength. Bell became nervous, thinking, this is a very rare item. Drinking this increases magical power several times. This is bad if he uses this technique. Van took out his blades again, and sparks began to swirl around them. He smiled menacingly and told Bell, "You'll regret not killing me when you had the chance." Van sharply swung both hands, sending the blades flying towards Bell. They left a sparkling trail behind them. Bell concentrated, focusing on the sparkling blades, and prepared to parry the blows. Suddenly, all the sparkling blades froze in the air around Bell, glittering even more. Van smiled, saying, "You're caught." The blades around Bell formed a thunder cage, lifting him into the air. Bell became very worried, thinking, my body rose because of this. Meanwhile, Reich crawled to the wall and weakly called out to Bell, realizing he had fallen into a trap. At that moment, Bell called upon the shield of Achilles, which began to protect him from the sparks. He then ordered his weapon to destroy everything around him. Wind currents swirled around the weapon, but it didn't help. He suddenly realized that within the barrier, the wind would simply circle around. Cursing loudly, Bell struggled against the confinement. Van smiled when he saw Bell's predicament and ordered the thunder to strike. The daggers that surrounded Bell crackled with electricity, poised to unleash their power. The sparkles intensified, and suddenly, numerous lightning bolts materialized within the barrier. Each bolt struck Bell relentlessly, sending searing pain coursing through his body. He screamed, helpless and unable to defend himself as Vaughn laughed menacingly. "Don't be afraid," Vaughn mocked, "I'll finish you off now." Bell's eyes began to roll back from the ceaseless assault of lightning. Desperation clawed at his mind, he couldn't die now. Out of nowhere, ice arrows flew in from the side, striking the blades and displacing them. The thunder cage collapsed instantly, and Bell was freed. Vaughn, taken aback by this unexpected turn, turned towards the direction from which the arrows had been fired. There, he saw the princess, her divine weapon summoned and her bow aimed directly at him. She said, "That knight is risking his life for me, so I can't be afraid." Vaughn, seething with rage, shouted, "You're just a bitch." He lunged towards her, knives pointed menacingly. The princess, seeing the imminent threat, felt a wave of worry wash over her. She was unsure of what to do next. But Bell, now free, rose to his feet and thanked the princess. Hearing Bell's voice, Vaughn halted his advance and turned around. He didn't have time to react as Bell swiftly swung his sword, delivering a sweeping wound across Vaughn's body. The wound was severe, causing Vaughn's eyes to roll back as blood gushed from his mouth, splattering onto Bell's face. Bell's eyes were fixed on Vaughn as the latter lost consciousness and collapsed to the floor, lifeless. Bell smiled, wiping the blood from his face, and walked up to the princess. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. The princess looked at him with a sad, guilty expression. She didn't answer immediately, but got up from the floor, walked towards him, and placed her hand on his cheek. "You're a fool," she said softly. "You're covered in wounds." Bell sighed, "There's nothing wrong with that." He smiled reassuringly. She apologized, "I'm sorry for dragging you into this squabble over the inheritance. By the way, you're really strong, right?" Belle said, trying to lighten the mood. The princess smiled faintly. Compared to you, not at all. She thanked him and promised, I'll help if you're ever in danger. Belle knelt before the princess, a grateful smile gracing his face. Thank you, he said earnestly. The princess smiled tenderly in return. She gently removed a ring from her finger and held it out to him. Take this, she said, placing the ring in his palm. It's a token of my gratitude. Belle's expression shifted as he looked at the ring, a silver band adorned with a brilliant blue gem. He was astonished by its beauty and significance. After the mission to escort the princess had concluded, Belle returned home. He entered his father's office and immediately knelt before him. I've finally returned, Belle announced. His father, the Duke, looked down at him with a proud smile. I heard everything. You successfully protected the princess. Belle confirmed, yes, the mission is complete. The Duke's eyes fell upon Belle's hand and the ring he wore. Is this Solomon's ring? He asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. Belle glanced at the ring and nodded. The princess gave it to me as a sign of trust. The Duke's expression grew contemplative. Solomon's ring is one of the treasures passed down through generations by kings. It's said to possess special magical powers. He paused, considering the implications. For the princess to give you such a valuable item. You truly are remarkable. After a moment of thought, the Duke continued, you will soon need to enter Athena. Belle looked up in surprise. Athena, he repeated. He knew Athena as a prestigious school for paladins, an institution frequented by politicians and those of recognized family lineage. In the Castro family, children were typically educated by private tutors at home. However, the heir to the family headship had to attend school and socialize with peers. This was the path to future inheritance. Belle nodded resolutely. Everything will be as you say, father. The Duke smiled approvingly. When the time comes to act, I will notify you. Until then, rest. Belle, however, did not leave immediately. He turned back to his father, a determined look on his face. I have one more request, he said. After some time passed, the doors to a new living room opened. Sarah, Belle's younger sister, ran inside, her face alight with joy. She circled the room, her excitement palpable. Is this my new room now? She asked, jumping onto the bed with glee. Belle, standing nearby, smiled warmly. Yes, father allowed it. Belle thought about how moving into the main mansion had given them more space, no longer confined to cramped quarters. Sarah lay down on her new bed and looked up at Belle with gratitude. I'm so grateful to you, she said, her voice filled with warmth. But her joy quickly faded when she noticed something wrong with Belle's hand. Seeing the wound, she asked worriedly, what happened? Are you okay? It's just a cut I got during the mission, he replied calmly. Sarah, her concern evident, touched the wound gently. She began to mutter with a sad expression, then suddenly raised her hands and exclaimed, Pain, go away. Belle chuckled softly and thanked her. I'm not in pain anymore, he said, patting her on the head. Sarah laughed contentedly, comforted by his response. Despite the moment of levity, Belle's thoughts grew serious. He knew that being treated better at the main mansion came with its own responsibilities. In 5 years, another duke would start a war against them. Sarah could be in danger again. To protect her, Belle needed to learn many things and become the next head of the family. Time passed, and in a dark room, Jean sat at the center, drawing mountains on a canvas. Laser entered and knelt before him, greeting him. Jean remained silent, focused on his art, and applied a deliberate stroke to the canvas. Laser spoke, I have sad news for you. The Duke has decided to send young Mr. Belle to Athena. Jean continued his silent work, prompting Leisure to continue, this is the first time someone other than you will be sent there. A tidal war could break out before it even begins. I have something for you. Jean interrupted him, leave me alone. He set his brushes and palette on the table and looked at his painting. He's not a threat to me, Jean declared. Laser wanted to protest, but Jean cut him off again. The fact that he's improving is only to my advantage. A dark aura began to emanate from Jean, causing the paint on the canvas to drip. He touched the still wet canvas with his palm, spreading the colors. Laser watched in surprise as Jean smeared the paint onto his face, leaving streaks of color across his features. I like to destroy something once it's completed, Jean said with a chilling smile. Laser became nervous and quickly replied, I understand. After their conversation, he left Jean's room and headed down the corridor. As he walked, he couldn't help but think about the potential danger Belle posed. No matter what Jean wants, it's risky to leave Belle unchecked, he thought. Belle had several weapons and had already defeated a rank B knight at a young age. Laser quickened his pace, determined to take precautionary measures. Time passed, and Belle sat on a vast, empty platform, holding a sword in his hands. His thoughts were focused on improving his weapon skills to rank B and above. If he could unlock those skills, he would have a significant advantage. To achieve this, he needed to defeat high-rank monsters, but time was not on his side. In the reflection of his blade, he noticed a silhouette hastily approaching. He turned around swiftly and saw that it was Laser. Laser approached and greeted him. Bell stood up, surprised. "Laser," he said, "did my brother send you?" Laser clenched his fists, but Bell didn't notice. He bowed and said, "I apologize for my previous actions. It was impolite of me to draw my sword on the Duke's son." Bell was slightly taken aback by Laser's sudden politeness. What's wrong with him, he thought. He's so polite. Aloud, he replied, "It's fine. Don't worry about it." Laser bowed again. "I'm grateful from the bottom of my heart," he said. "I have another matter to discuss with you." Bell repeated, "Another conversation?" He became wary, tightening his grip on his sword's hilt. Laser continued, "I would like to ask if you could accompany me on a mission to subjugate monsters." "Mission?" Bell asked suspiciously. "The other knights, including Jean, have other plans," Laser explained. "But after seeing your results, I wanted to ask for your help." Bell found it strange. Why would Jin's servant ask me for help, he wondered. As the Duke's son, he couldn't refuse a mission, but he decided to remain on guard. "I understand," he said. "I agree." Laser bowed again, thanking him for his help. As he did so, a grin spread across his face, hidden from Bell's view. Now, under the pretext of a mission, there's only one thing left, he thought. Bell interrupted his thoughts. "So, what next? Where do I need to carry out this mission?" Laser replied, "You need to arrive at a place near the remote area of Meldia known as Ithaca." Bell was surprised. "Ithaca," he repeated. He smiled, thinking, "It's a perfect place to improve my mana." This manhwa is currently on hold for now. But we will bring other manhwa recap for you soon. Thanks for watching.